Liam Chen's hands turned to ash. Not visibly. To everyone else, they looked normal. But whenever he tried to touch anything precious, black soot fell from his fingers like a disease. He couldn't eat without contaminating his food, couldn't hold a book without leaving dark smudges. The Virgin Mary's tears. The Virgin Mary's painted eyes wept molten tears as flames clawed up her robes. 5 students stood in Wickfield Square, their laughter dying into silence when they realized they were not the only ones watching. In the dancing orange light, something impossible flickered across the statue's stone face, an expression of infinite sorrow that seemed to look directly at each of them. The fire had started only minutes before, but already the paint was bubbling and peeling like skin. Amber Martinez clutched the empty lighter, her hand trembling. Sierra Walsh's phone continued live streaming to her followers, but the comments had stopped scrolling. Even the internet had gone quiet. Then they heard it. A sound like crying, like mourning, like a mother watching her children destroy themselves. Miguel Santos was the first to step back, his hands pressed to his ears. But the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within, from some place in their souls they'd forgotten existed. "What have we done?" Liam Chen whispered, the red gas can slipping from his fingers. But it was too late. The real burning had only just begun. Drop a comment and don't forget to hit subscribe for more haunting tales that blur the line between the ordinary and the impossible. 6 hours earlier. The autumn wind carried the scent of burning leaves through Wickfield Square. But tonight it would carry something else entirely. The acrid smell of regret and the bitter taste of consequences yet to come. 5 students stood in the orange glow of streetlights, their voices raised not in celebration, but in fury. The new state education mandate had stripped their university of funding, their professors of tenure, their futures of certainty. They were angry, and anger needed a target. "This whole town thinks they're so pure," Amber Martinez spat, her dark hair whipping across her face as she gestured toward the statue that had stood sentinel in the square since 1954. "Look at their precious symbol, standing there judging us while they vote away our education." The Virgin Mary statue rose 12 feet from its marble pedestal. Her stone robes painted the softest blue, her hands outstretched in eternal blessing. Her face, weathered by decades of rain and wind, still held an expression of infinite compassion. "It's just concrete and paint," Liam Chen said, though his voice held less conviction than his words. The red gas can felt heavy in his hands, heavier than it should have been. Sierra Walsh had her phone out already, streaming to her followers. "We're here to show this town what real change looks like," she announced to the camera, her voice artificially bright. "Time to tear down the old and make way for the new." Cody Rodriguez set up his professional streaming equipment, the kind he used for gaming videos. This would get more views than anything he'd ever posted. Going live in 3, 2. Jess Thompson was already moving to the music playing from her portable speaker, her movements sharp and aggressive. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. Only Miguel Santos, a local student who'd grown up seeing this statue every day of his life, stood apart from the group. "Guys, this isn't right," he called out. "You don't know what this means to people here. My grandmother—" "Your grandmother needs to join the 21st century," Amber cut him off, snatching the lighter from her pocket. The gasoline poured from Liam's can in a steady stream, soaking into the stone base, pooling on the ground. The fumes rose, making them all dizzy. Or maybe that was just the adrenaline. Miguel's hands shook as he pulled out his phone. He should call someone, the police, campus security, his grandmother. But his finger hovered over the screen, paralyzed by the weight of choice. To act would mean standing against his peers, becoming the tattletale, the religious fanatic, the one who chose an old statue over human relationships. His hesitation lasted only seconds, but it was enough. "Say goodbye to your precious virgin," Amber laughed, but the sound was hollow, forced. She flicked the Zippo. The flame caught instantly, racing up the stone in tongues of orange and blue. The paint began to bubble and peel. The statue's serene expression seemed to shift in the dancing light. Or perhaps That was just the heat waves distorting their vision. Sierra danced closer to the flames, Jess recording her every move. "This is what liberation looks like!" she shouted over the crackling fire. But as the flames rose higher, something changed. The laughter died in their throats. The painted eyes of the statue, softened by heat, seemed to weep tears of molten color. And then they heard it. To understand what the students had done, you had to know the story of why the statue stood there at all. November 15th, 1954. The Wickfield mine collapse. 43 men went down that Tuesday morning. Only one came back up. For 3 days, the women of Wickfield gathered in the square, holding vigil. They prayed in English and Spanish, in Polish and Italian, all the languages that had built this small mining town. Maria Santos, Miguel's great-grandmother, led them in the rosary each hour, her voice never faltering, even as hope grew thin. On the third night, when the rescue teams had all but given up, Tommy Kowalski emerged from the rubble. He was the youngest of the trapped miners, barely 22, and he was delirious from dehydration and trauma. But his story never changed, not in the 68 years that followed, not even on his deathbed last spring. "She walked through the fire," he told them, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Through the flames and falling timber like it was nothing. A woman in blue robes, glowing like moonlight. She took my hand and led me to an air pocket, then to a passage I'd never seen before. 'Wait here,' she told me. 'Help is coming,' and then she was gone. The women didn't need to be told who she was. They'd been calling on her for 3 days. By Christmas of that year, they'd raised enough money for the statue. It wasn't fancy. Local artist Maria Esperanza carved it from Indiana limestone and painted it herself, working by candlelight in her garage through the winter months. But when they unveiled it on Easter morning 1955, something settled over Wickfield. A sense of protection, of presence. The statue weathered storms that flattened other towns. During the flood of 78, when the river rose 15 feet, the water stopped just inches from her pedestal. In the tornado of 93, a trailer was lifted and set down gently in the square, its family of 4 inside unharmed, while the funnel seemed to split and pass around the statue on either side. People began leaving flowers, lighting candles, whispering prayers. Not worship, the townspeople were careful about that, but reverence, gratitude, love. The statue became the heart of Wickfield. Every major decision, every town meeting, every moment of crisis brought people to the square. When the mine finally closed in 1987, they held the memorial service at her feet. When the high school won the state championship in 2010, they celebrated in her shadow. When COVID hit in 2020, they strung lights around her like a beacon of hope. She was more than stone and paint. She was their mother, their protector, their reminder that some things endure. Until 5 angry students decided she was just concrete. The morning after brought an unnatural quiet to Wickfield, the kind of silence that comes after something sacred has been broken. The fire department had extinguished the flames by dawn, but the damage was complete. The statue's face was blackened and cracked, her painted robes scorched to bare stone. Her outstretched hands had crumbled away entirely. Only her eyes remained intact, 2 spots of faded blue paint that seemed to follow you as you walked around the ruined pedestal. The students woke in their dorms and apartments with hangovers that had nothing to do with alcohol. They'd celebrated their victory the night before with cheap beer and cheaper bravado. But now, in the grey morning light streaming through their windows, something felt wrong. Amber was the first to notice. She reached for her phone to check the video Sierra had posted, but the screen remained black no matter how many times she pressed the power button. The device wasn't dead. It was warm to the touch, almost hot. But it wouldn't turn on. Across town, Liam was having the same problem. His phone, his laptop, his tablet. Nothing with a screen would work. But that was nothing compared to what came next. 3 days after the burning Amber Martinez discovered that every flame she encountered screamed. It started with her morning coffee. She'd lit the gas stove in her dorm's kitchenette, and the blue flame erupted not with its usual quiet hiss, but with a human voice crying out in agony. She stumbled backward, turning off the burner, but the screaming continued in her head. At dinner, when someone lit a candle at the next table, Amber heard the wail of burning flesh. She ran from the cafeteria, but even the exit signs, their red letters glowing like tiny fires, whispered in voices of pain. By Thursday, she couldn't be near any source of heat without hearing the desperate cries. A match on television made her collapse. A cigarette lighter clicked on 3 tables away, and Amber heard a child screaming for its mother. The worst came at night, when she dreamed of being inside the statue herself, stone cracking around her while fire ate her from within. She would wake to find soot on her pillowcase, though she'd showered before bed. Liam Chen's hands turned to ash. Not visibly. To everyone else, they looked normal. But whenever he tried to touch anything precious, black soot fell from his fingers like a disease. He couldn't eat without contaminating his food. He couldn't hold a book without leaving dark smudges on every page. He couldn't embrace his girlfriend without staining her clothes. He began wearing gloves, but the ash seeped through. He scrubbed his hands until they bled, but the contamination remained. Each morning brought fresh soot, and with it, the whispered accusation, "You fed the fire." The coughing started a week later. Black soot mixed with blood, each spasm accompanied by those same whispered words. He visited the campus clinic, but the x-rays showed nothing. The doctors found no explanation for why a healthy 20-year-old was coughing up what looked like the remnants of a funeral pyre. Sierra Walsh's voice became a curse. Whenever she spoke into a phone or microphone, her own words came back distorted, transformed into crying, prayers, or screams. Her followers began unfollowing, not because they ignored her, but because they thought she was uploading disturbing, blasphemous content. She tried to explain, to tell people what was happening, but even in person, her voice betrayed her. She would open her mouth to speak, and only hymns would escape. Ancient songs in Latin that she'd never learned, sung in her voice, but not by her will. The campus radio station banned her after a live interview turned into 15 minutes of what sounded like a demonic possession. Her professors asked her to stop participating in class discussions after her attempts to answer questions became eerie chants that left other students weeping. By the second week, Sierra had stopped trying to speak altogether. But the hymns continued, humming themselves through her lips even when her mouth was closed. Cody Rodriguez's screens showed him his own damnation. Every device he turned on displayed the same footage, himself burning alive inside the statue, shot from impossible angles, playing on an endless loop. Sometimes the burning figure was him. Sometimes it was his little sister. Sometimes it was his parents, all of them screaming his name, blaming him for their torment. He smashed his monitors, but even reflective surfaces betrayed him. Windows, puddles, the chrome on car bumpers. Everything became a screen showing his punishment. He couldn't escape his own image, burning forever in digital hell. The worst part wasn't the horror. It was the clarity. Each flame was rendered in perfect detail. Every expression of agony was crystal clear. He could see himself dying in 4K resolution, and he knew he deserved every pixel of it. Jess Thompson danced with ghosts. Any rhythm she tried to move to was hijacked by the sound of chains dragging and funeral bells. But worse than the audio was what audiences saw. Whenever Jess performed, her shadow moved differently than her body. Sometimes it knelt in prayer while she leaped. Sometimes it writhed in pain while she spun. And always, there was a second shadow, a phantom figure in blue robes dancing opposite her, graceful and sorrowful and impossible. The first time someone recorded it, Jess thought they were lying. But the video showed it clearly. 2 shadows where there should have been 1, and both moving to choreography she'd never learned. The phantom dancer's movements told a story of loss and forgiveness that made viewers weep, while Jess's own shadow seemed to beg for mercy. She stopped performing publicly, but the shadow dance continued in private. Every night, alone in her dorm room, Jess would find herself moving to music only she could hear, while her shadow and its companion acted out an eternal tragedy on the wall. Miguel Santos hadn't slept properly since the burning. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flames. Every time he opened them, he saw the accusation in his neighbors' faces. He'd tried to stop it, but not hard enough. He'd spoken up, but not loud enough. He'd stood apart, but not far enough away to avoid complicity. The weight of collective guilt pressed down on Wickfield like a physical thing. The town that had always pulled together in crisis was fracturing along lines of faith and doubt, tradition and progress, forgiveness and judgment. Some called for the students to be arrested. Others said it was just property damage, that people were overreacting. The divide ran through families, friendships, the very soul of the community. Miguel's grandmother, Elena Santos, had been one of the women who'd raised money for the original statue. At 93, she was the last living link to that sacred history. And watching her weep over the destruction was more than Miguel could bear. 2 weeks after the burning, on a grey Sunday morning when most of the town was either at church or sleeping off Saturday night, Miguel walked alone to Wickfield Square. The pedestal looked smaller in daylight, diminished by its emptiness. Someone had tried to clean off the soot, but ghostly stains remained, outlining where the statue had stood for nearly 7 decades. Flowers had been left, wilted roses, plastic carnations, hand-picked wildflowers from children who didn't understand why the pretty lady was gone. Miguel knelt on the cold concrete, something he hadn't done since he was a child, dragged to Mass by his grandmother. The words came haltingly, rusty from disuse. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Not just for what they did, but for what I didn't do. I could have stopped it. I should have stopped it. I was afraid of being laughed at, afraid of standing out, afraid of being the weird religious kid. And because of my fear, your home was burned down." The wind picked up, scattering the dead leaves around the square in tiny whirlwinds. Miguel shivered and started to stand, but a weight on his shoulder stopped him. Not heavy, but warm. Too warm for the October morning. He turned slowly, heart hammering, and saw her. Not glowing, not floating, not surrounded by impossible light, or accompanied by heavenly choirs. She stood beside him as simply and naturally as if she'd always been there, her blue robes moving gently in the wind, her face kind and infinitely sad. "You were quiet, but not silent," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of his grandmother's generation. The sound of women who'd prayed in 2 languages and raised children in hope. That matters. Miguel's grandmother had always said that the Virgin Mary appeared to those who needed her most. But looking at her now, Miguel realized he'd had it backwards. She appeared to those who needed to serve her most. "What do I do?" he asked. She smiled, and for a moment, the grey morning felt touched by spring. "What you've always done. You speak when others are silent. You stand when others kneel. You remember when others forget. But they won't listen to me. I'm nobody special. I'm not a priest or a leader. You are Miguel Santos, great-grandson of Maria Santos, who led the prayers that saved Tommy Kowalski. You carry their faith in your blood and their courage in your heart. That makes you special enough." She began to fade, becoming translucent in the morning light, but her voice remained clear. "Tell them forgiveness is not about forgetting. Tell them mercy is not about avoiding consequences. Tell them love is not about being comfortable." And then she was gone, leaving only the warmth on his shoulder and a sense of purpose Miguel had never felt before. The changes in the 5 students did not go unnoticed. Amber had withdrawn completely from social life, emerging from her dorm only for classes and meals, walking through campus like a ghost haunted by flames. When she did speak, it was to apologize. To professors for assignments she'd never turned in late. To cafeteria workers for meals she'd never complained about. To fellow students for slights both real and imagined. Liam had started attending daily Mass at St. Catherine's, the small Catholic church on the edge of campus. He'd never been religious before, but now he could be found in the back pew every morning at 7, clutching a rosary his grandmother had given him years ago, praying with the desperation of the truly haunted. Sierra had gone silent on all her social media platforms. Her last post, 2 weeks after the burning, was simple text. "Some things are too important for words. Some mistakes require silence to truly understand." She'd enrolled in a theology class and could be found in the library reading books about comparative religion and the history of sacred spaces. Cody had donated all his streaming equipment to the campus media center and taken a job at a local homeless shelter. When asked about his sudden career change, he'd simply said, "I got tired of performing. I wanted to start serving. Jess had choreographed a piece called Restoration for her senior thesis, a wordless dance about destruction and redemption that left audiences in tears. She'd submitted it to festivals nationwide, not for fame or recognition, but because she believed art could heal what words could not. None of them spoke publicly about what they'd experienced. They couldn't have explained it even if they'd wanted to. How do you tell people that the statue you burned had visited you in dreams and visions? How do you confess to supernatural justice without sounding insane? But Miguel could see the change in them, could recognize the particular kind of brokenness that comes from encountering something infinitely greater than yourself. He'd felt it himself that morning in the square. 3 weeks after his encounter with the Virgin, Miguel did something he'd never imagined himself capable of. He called a meeting, not through official channels. The town council was still too divided, the university administration too worried about liability. Instead, he went door to door the way his great-grandmother had when she'd organized the vigil for the trapped miners. He talked to the grieving Catholics and the angry secularists, to the students and the townspeople, to anyone who would listen. "We need to face this together," he told them. What happened in the square wasn't just about a statue or education funding or religious freedom. It was about us, about who we are when we think no one's watching, about what we do when we're angry and afraid. The meeting was held in the high school gymnasium, neutral ground that belonged neither to church nor campus. 67 people showed up, which was more than Miguel had dared hope for and fewer than the town needed. The 5 students sat in the front row, not by choice, but because Miguel had asked them to. They looked fragile in the harsh fluorescent light, nothing like the bold revolutionaries who'd live-streamed destruction just a month before. Miguel stood at the podium, his prepared speech crumpled in his sweating palm. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "I was there that night. I watched them burn the statue, and I didn't stop them. Not really. I said a few words, but I didn't put my body between them and the fire. I didn't call for help. I didn't do what my great-grandmother would have done, what any of the women who built that statue would have done. I was a coward. And because I was a coward, something sacred was lost." He looked at the students, seeing his own shame reflected in their faces. They were angry about the education cuts. We're all angry about something. But anger without wisdom is just destruction. And destruction without consequence is just chaos. The room was silent. 67 people holding their breath. These 5 students have been living with the consequences of their choices for a month now. I can see it in them. They've been changed by what they did in ways I don't think any of us can fully understand. The question is, what do we do with that change? An elderly woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. Miguel recognized her as Mrs. Kowalski, Tommy's widow. "What do you propose, young man?" Miguel took a deep breath. "I propose we rebuild, not just the statue, but the community that was broken when it burned. I propose we let these students help with the rebuilding, not as punishment, but as healing. I propose we talk to each other instead of about each other. And I propose we remember that forgiveness isn't about pretending things never happened. It's about choosing to move forward together despite what happened." Murmurs rippled through the gymnasium, some approving, some skeptical, all uncertain. It was Amber who stood first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lit the fire. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to help rebuild what I destroyed. If you'll let me." One by one, the other 4 students stood. Liam offered to organize a fundraising drive. Sierra volunteered to document the rebuilding process, not for social media, but for the town archives. Cody said he'd coordinate with local artists and craftspeople. Jess proposed a dedication ceremony that would honor both the old statue and the new. The vote wasn't unanimous. Some people left without speaking. Others spoke without agreeing. But 51 of the 67 people present agreed to the rebuilding plan, and more importantly, they agreed to work together on it. It was a beginning. The new statue was not identical to the old one. It couldn't be. Maria Esperanza, the artist who had carved the original, had died in 1987, and her techniques and materials were lost to time. But the town found another artist, David Reyes, a sculptor from the state capital who specialized in religious art and understood both the technical and spiritual challenges of the project. The fundraising took 4 months, not just from Wickfield, but from surrounding communities, from the university, even from strangers who'd heard the story and felt moved to contribute. The 5 students worked tirelessly organising bake sales and car washes, reaching out to local businesses, applying for grants from arts foundations and religious organisations. Amber discovered she had a talent for grant writing, spending hours crafting applications that told the story of destruction and redemption with a power that came from lived experience. Liam organised a benefit concert featuring local bands, managing logistics with an efficiency he'd never shown for anything else. Sierra interviewed community members, collecting oral histories about what the statue had meant to them, creating an archive of memory that would outlast any physical monument. Cody collaborated with David Reyes, documenting every stage of the creative process and learning about the spiritual significance of sacred art. Jess worked with the high school music and drama departments, developing a dedication ceremony that would honour the past while celebrating renewal. Miguel coordinated everything, becoming the bridge between old Wickfield and new, between the wounded and the healing, between the sacred and the secular. His grandmother, Elena Santos, became his unofficial advisor, sharing stories about the original statue that helped guide the recreation process. The new Virgin Mary was carved from the same Indiana limestone as her predecessor, but David Reyes incorporated elements that reflected the town's growth and diversity since 1954. Her robes bore subtle patterns inspired by the various cultures that now called Wickfield home. Her face, while maintaining the traditional features of Marian iconography, somehow seemed to reflect the faces of all the women who had prayed at her feet over the decades. But the most significant change was her hands. Instead of being outstretched in blessing, they were cupped, as if holding something precious, or perhaps offering to receive something broken, ready to make it whole. The dedication ceremony was held on Easter Sunday, exactly 1 year after the burning. The square was packed with people, not just from Wickfield, but from communities throughout the region. Local news crews covered the event, but respectfully, understanding that this was more than a simple statue unveiling. Father Martinez from St. Catherine's offered a blessing, but so did Pastor Williams from First Baptist, Rabbi Cohen from the Reformed Temple in the next county, and Imam Hassan from the Islamic Center in the state capital. Miguel had insisted on interfaith participation, understanding that the new statue needed to belong to the whole community, not just its Catholic members. When the white cloth was removed, revealing the Virgin Mary in all her restored glory, the crowd fell silent. She was beautiful, more beautiful than the original somehow. The limestone seemed to glow in the spring sunlight, and her expression held both the tragedy of what had been lost and the joy of what had been found. But it was the 5 students who drew the most attention. They stood together at the base of the statue, transformed by their year of service and reflection. Amber had found her voice again, not the angry shout of protest, but the quiet authority of someone who had learned to speak truth with humility. Liam's constant smell of gasoline had faded, replaced by the scent of the woodworking shop where he'd learned to craft crosses and religious art. Sierra's social media presence had returned, but now she used it to amplify voices of reconciliation and community healing. Cody's new videos documented acts of service and kindness, finding the miraculous in the mundane. Jess's dancing had evolved into something sacred, movement that told stories of redemption and grace. They each placed a single white rose at the statue's base. And as they did, Mrs. Kowalski stepped forward. At 89, Tommy's widow moved slowly, but her voice was strong. My husband saw her in the mine that day, saw her lead him to safety when everyone else was lost. I never doubted his story, not for 1 second. And I don't doubt that she's been here this whole year, working through all of you, healing what was broken. She looked directly at the 5 students. Tommy always said she didn't save him because he was perfect. She saved him because he was loved. Same with all of you. Same with all of us. As the crowd began to disperse, families and friends gathering around the base of the statue to leave flowers and light candles, Miguel noticed something that made his breath catch. There in the limestone at the statue's feet were marks that hadn't been there during the carving process. marks that looked like water stains, as if tears had fallen on the stone and somehow been absorbed into its very structure. David Reyes saw them too, and when Miguel caught his eye, the artist simply nodded. Some things couldn't be explained, only accepted. The autumn wind carried the scent of burning leaves through Wickfield Square, but tonight it also carried something else. The sweet fragrance of renewal, the gentle breath of forgiveness, and the enduring promise that some things, once broken, can be made even more beautiful in their restoration. The Virgin Mary stood in her place of honor, her cupped hands ready to hold whatever broken things her children might bring her. And in the growing dusk, if you looked very carefully, you might have seen her smile. But the story didn't end with the dedication ceremony. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable began to happen in Wickfield. The fractures that had split the community started to heal, not through forgetting what had happened, but through the shared work of rebuilding. The 5 students continued their service long after the statue was complete. Amber established a scholarship fund for students studying conflict resolution and restorative justice. Liam started an interfaith dialogue group that met monthly in the square, bringing together people of different beliefs to share their stories and find common ground. Sierra's oral history project expanded into a full community archive, preserving not just the story of the statue, but the voices of all Wickfield's residents. Her social media presence became a platform for amplifying marginalized voices and promoting understanding across divides. Cody's documentation of the rebuilding process became an award-winning short film that toured regional festivals, not as entertainment, but as education, showing how communities could heal from even the deepest wounds. Jess's dedication choreography evolved into an annual performance that drew visitors from across the state, a moving meditation on forgiveness and renewal that left audiences changed. And Miguel? He returned to school, but with a new sense of purpose. He changed his major to social work and community organizing, understanding that his true calling was to be a bridge builder, a voice for healing in a world too often torn apart by anger and fear. The new statue became more than just a replacement for what was lost. It became a symbol of what was possible when people chose reconciliation over revenge, restoration over retaliation. Pilgrims came from distant places to see it, drawn not by its beauty alone, but by the story of how it came to be. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the autumn wind carried the scent of burning leaves through Wickfield Square, visitors would swear they could hear something impossible. The sound of 5 young voices, no longer screaming in supernatural torment, but singing together in harmony, their song joining the eternal hymn of forgiveness that seemed to emanate from the statue's cupped hands. Some things, once broken, could indeed be made more beautiful in their restoration, and some sins, once truly repented, could become the foundation for grace beyond imagining.